Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphanlast, aka Skylar Madison. And that sound effect that you just heard at the beginning of the video, I'm thinking about animating my logo to it and having a little bit of a stopgap of intro to my videos, possibly with that sound effect or possibly of some music if the guy that agreed to do the music would actually do the music. But anyways, I don't know. Let me know what you think. Eventually I will be going back to the video intro series, but I stopped working on that so I could work on the 51 animation challenges videos. But I do need to have a proper intro. So with the stuff that I animated so far, you can see Flour Sack number 1. Most of his actions are completely animated and everything like that. And, you know, I kind of experimented with the idea of him throwing his hands up in the air and throwing them back down out of frustration. I don't know how successful that was, but, you know, I think regardless, I gave him some personality. You can see that I finished the animatic. The animatic is completely finished. Kudos to me for that. And you can also see the beginnings of me animating the ball. Now, I'm animating the ball with a motion path. Now, motion paths are extremely useful for things like a ball or the camera, actually. And if you guys would like to take a look at a video which teaches you how to animate a ball on a motion path or the camera on a motion path or anything on a motion path, I have a video,
Moving Bouncing Ball on a Motion Path 51 Animation Challenges Open Tunes.
And it should be appearing as a card on the screen right now. Now, I never actually finished the ball in this animation, animating it on that motion path and all that. I just ran out of time. I just don't have the time for it. Already as it is, I'm going to be staying up all night just to get this video out there. Now, the first thing that I tackled while working on this project for the week basically is something that I mentioned in the last video in the 51 animation challenges. Flour Sack number 1 wound up being much larger than Flour Sack number 2. Something about it just didn't work out right. Now, I should have been paying attention to my thumbnail images while I was creating the animatic. And so the first attempt that I did in order to try to fix it was trying to tinker with the animate tool. But for the first 2 seconds of me trying that technique, I immediately realized I'm going to screw up every single keyframe, every single bit of work that I've done with the animate tool if I do it that way. So I actually had to tackle getting him to the right size by using the selection tool and going frame by frame, selecting them, making them larger, and repositioning them. This actually took quite a bit of time. Now, one thing that I'd like to mention, recently there has been a nightly build which has fixed the problem that I was complaining about in the last video in this series. What I was complaining about was OpenToonz was just deleting different drawings, all sorts of drawings. I would wind up selecting everything and auto-renumbering them and closing down OpenToonz and then opening it up again and finding that half my drawings were missing. And I really complained about it, really stressed about it. I mentioned, hey, I know that there are developers out there listening and watching my videos. Please go fix that. That's what I said. I kind of said it like a jerk. And then in my OpenToonz news video, I wound up being a jerk in the last 2 minutes of it. And there's like a million different ways that I could have said that. The exact same things that I said in that video and in the OpenToonz news video. I could have said the same information, just said it differently, and people would have appreciated it a lot more. It's just, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm being ignored. That can be pretty frustrating. Evidently, there was a developer that was listening to that video, and they did fix that problem. Now, while working on this 51 animation challenge video right here that you're watching right now, this very moment, I did have one drawing that didn't save properly, but I did download the most recent nightly build, which seems to have fixed the problem. Now, I don't know why that one drawing didn't save properly. I don't know if it's the same bug or not. I don't know why it happened, but I did wind up losing one drawing. That didn't really frustrate me too bad, but that's something to note. I lost one drawing. Just some food for thought. Like, I'm very glad that the problem has been resolved as far as I can tell. Now, there are some other bugs that I'd like to mention really quickly here. Now, the function editor. The function editor is a nightmare to work with right now. And I think it's because we've added the ability to zoom in and zoom out of frames on the timeline. I genuinely think that's what's causing the problem. because once I wound up using the timeline and such like that, it just seems like it just bounced me all over the place on the function editor. It just seems like if I'm using the function editor, then the frame that I have selected on the function editor should be smack dab on the screen space that the timeline or X sheet is taking up. And if I'm messing around with the X sheet or the timeline, that frame that I'm screwing around with should be smack dab in the center of the screen space that the function editor is taking up, instead of it bouncing all over the place. Now, I don't know how difficult that'll be in order to code, but that is an extreme frustration, equally as frustrating as not being able to properly color my vector work. The function editor does not display the right frame, and oftentimes actually winds up bouncing all over the place. I'll try to select something like frame 615 or something, and I'll double click on it, and suddenly I'm on frame 1, and it's trying to get me to type a value into frame 1. I don't know why that would happen, but it happened at least 15 to 20 different times while I was messing around with the motion path. Now, I didn't really mess around with the motion path that much, but it sure felt like I was, simply because I couldn't get any work done because the function editor was just bouncing all over the place. So it was really frustrating. So that's the main issue that I had a problem with in this video, and it wasn't my fault. It's a problem with OpenToonz. It needs to be fixed, and I'm not saying that to be a dick. It just needs to be fixed. I don't know if anyone's reported it yet, and if it hasn't, it needs to be. Now, I guess I could go ahead and report it myself, but it seems like whenever I go on to GitHub and report an issue without it actually being a bounty, no one takes it seriously because I'm not a developer. Now, more on that later. Now, I just finished working on the animatic. It's finally finished. I just copied the walk cycle multiple times throughout this animation and such like that. That's one of the cool things about OpenToonz. You're able to create an animation and just keep on reusing it rather than having to recreate it each and every single time that you need it. In fact, you can carry it on over from one scene to another, to another, to another. So at this point, I also started to tackle variously different actions that Flour Sack number 1 would be doing. And you can see pretty clearly, and I mentioned this in a lot of my 51 animation challenges videos, where basically you can clearly see me using the point-to-point technique, and I utilize the point-to-point on the onion skins themselves. It seems like it's extremely effective to use it that way rather than having to flip back and forth. Now, to each their own. Everyone seems to have their own opinion on the proper way to have a bouncing ball and the proper way to do point-to-point animation, and every single animator seems to think that they have the dogmatic answer and there is no other way to do it, but this is the way that works for me. Now, I am still trying to nail down some sort of workflow using the X sheet as the animation sheet. I think that eventually I've found a good little ebb and flow for it. As soon as I can kind of verbalize it and put it into words and such, I'll let you guys know. But earlier in the previous video in this series, I was talking about using the level strip in order to possibly animate and flip between frames, but sometimes it just seems like they're all disjointed, they're not lining up, and so there's no way to flip on the level strip sometimes. And I mean that genuinely, like, for some reason, frame number 1 would be located on a completely different location from frame number 2 to frame number 3. They're all disjumbled in different locations, not even resembling the locations that they appear in the actual X sheet. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if that's a bug or what it is. I know that my use of the animate tool isn't what's causing it, because I used it on multiple occasions in situations where keyframes were nowhere even remotely close to what I was working on. There does come a point where I wind up turning off the X sheet as the animation sheet, especially when I needed to actually draw out on a raster level everything that I needed the ball to do. So I drew up a rough draft of the motion path, and then I used that rough draft as a means for me to draw out the motion path. Then I used the control point editor on the motion path in order to refine it, and then I proceeded from there to start animating with the motion path. I didn't actually finish it because the function editor is a nightmare. Again, I'll get into that even further. I'll slow down the video, and coincidentally, in order to slow down the video, it'll make this video a little bit longer, but I really want to show what it is that's going on that's an absolute nightmare with the function editor. Now, although I didn't use the formal technique of using spacing charts or anything like that, I did do a lot of interesting experimentation with the spacing and everything like that, and it's kind of hard to put into words, but one of the things that I was trying to do is using less frames, but it does seem as though if a character is moving rather slowly, it does require a good number of frames in order to make it look like a really smooth movement, rather than something that's just kind of patchy and jittery and such like that. I don't like having an animation that just doesn't look like it's alive, and if it just looks like it's kind of jerky and such like that, as if it's coming from a video game that's rendering graphics that are just too good for what it's capable of, it's just not something that I'm interested in having in my animation, something like that. One thing that I tried to make sure that I implemented was follow through, which typically involves, like, anticipation and follow through. It oftentimes deals with squash and stretch, at least from the beginning to the end of the animation, like the very beginning and then the very end, or just kind of doing an overshoot, or just kind of like doing a motion that's slightly going the opposite direction that you're going to go as a form of anticipation just before you go the direction that you actually want to go. And some of this involved adding a few more breakdowns and such like that. I just kind of figured that most of the thumbnail information, most of the animatic information would primarily be a series of keyframes rather than trying to focus on every single breakdown. Maybe I should have just focused on the breakdowns as well, just so that I have more information on the timeline than what I might feel is necessary at the time. Primarily because if you have to start screwing around a whole hell of a lot with the timeline after you have multiple different levels doing different things, such as flour sack number 1 on one frame and flour sack number 2 on another frame, the timing is dependent on each other. So if you wind up dramatically changing the timing with one, you have to dramatically change the timing with the other. And so that's something that I kind of had to keep in mind throughout the entire process. By and large, I've kept track of it pretty well, but it does get pretty frustrating over time and such like that. So that's something to keep in mind, that maybe it is best to have with the animatic every single breakdown, every single keyframe. It's just kind of hard to kind of think of everything that you might want the character to do throughout the entire animation. Now, another little thing that I kept running into throughout the whole time that I was making this animation was something that I believe is being reported on GitHub fairly recently, where the viewer isn't being updated on a regular basis, and I haven't actually experienced this problem before in the past. But basically, I'll go to play the animation, and it'll just play one frame for the full animation, and then I'll rewind the animation to the very beginning and play it again, and it plays just one frame of the entire animation. And then I'll do it one more time, and sometimes it'll play just a little bit, and then it'll just stick onto one frame, and then an autosave will make it so that it'll all just stick to one frame all over again throughout the entire animation. But then a manual save pressing Ctrl S somehow magically gets it so that it'll start playing the entire animation just fine. Or it won't. it'll just wind up making it all freeze up. At first, the way that I was trying to resolve the issue was just closing down OpenToonz and opening it up again. I did that probably about 15 times throughout the course of the time that I was working on this animation this week. And that was really kind of irritating, but, you know, it is what it is. In the end, I don't think that I actually needed to do that, but it worked. It's just, you know, if you're just a little bit patient, it takes just about as long just to wait for OpenToonz to start cooperating as it does to close down OpenToonz and open it up again, just so that you can watch your animation. I don't know what's causing this problem, but I do believe that the developers are working on it right now. There's a good number of discussion on this problem right now, and so if you're experiencing this problem as well, just keep in mind that you're not alone. Other people have voiced this concern and such like that. Now, I figured that since this motion where the character, the flour sack number 1, throws his hands up in the air, since it happened so fast that I'd include kind of a motion blur, and then I did another motion blur when he brings his arms back down. And I actually think that this is possibly the best motion blur that I've ever done. I've tried out a lot of cloned objects, cloned hands and such like that, and it's never really worked out for me that well at all, but this time around it really did. And it's mainly me just stretching things around, and I actually think that stretching is better than cloning at this point, even though I've seen some great animations where cloning an extra hand or something like that has looked excellent, made an animation look totally fluid and full of motion with the least number of frames humanly possible. But for some reason it just seems like smears, just smearing the character. It seems like and squashing and stretching them is probably the better route for my particular style. And, you know, recently on Twitter I posted a video where a Disney artist happened to work on the cartoon Sinbad. It's so unfortunate that cartoon didn't really take off, but really it is a masterful work of art. And on Twitter, that little snippet of the cartoon, it looks so realistic in terms of animation, and yet if you play it in slow motion, I found that exact same video on YouTube, and I played it at its slowest speed, and I just saw just how many motion blurs that were used, and it was pretty educational. There's a good number of, you know, motion blurs and such like that being used, and yet you're never really consciously aware of it because it just looks so smooth and so quick, and it's only on the screen for just a moment, and yet it looks so realistic. It's so weird how that works out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and really speed up a good portion of this last part of the video here, and then I'm going to go ahead and slow it down significantly so that you guys can actually see some of the problem of working with the function editor as of right now inside of OpenToonz, and I'm going to discuss a little bit of what I think needs to be improved on it. I've already touched on it already, but not having a visual associated with what needs to be improved is kind of not really too helpful sometimes, so I'm going to go ahead and address that. And so right here, the first idea that I had was creating a raster version of the ball, but then I created a vector version of the ball and then created a motion path. And I actually created the motion path twice because for some reason it wasn't working properly. But the second time was the charm and all that. Now, when working with a motion path, you're not creating keyframes on the X sheet or the timeline or anything like that. It's only specifically on the function editor, which makes it even less visual. So if there's some way to make this so that it can show up on the timeline, then that would be really helpful. But I mean, look at what's going on right now on the screen right now. What frame? Like, why? Like, you see me messing around on the timeline and you don't see anything going on the function editor. What frame am I on the function editor? A lot of the time it feels like I'm flying blind. If it just seems to me as though it's like the frame that I'm on the timeline should be smack dab in the middle of the screen space that the function editor is taking up. And yet that's not the case, and same vice versa. If I'm messing around with the function editor, then the frame should be highlighted in the center of the screen space that the timeline or the X sheet is taking up. And so it gets pretty frustrating. So here, I'm just flipping through frames on the timeline, and I'm flying completely blind. I have no idea what's going on with the function editor. Now, the thing is it's around this point I want to bring the stretch, the horizontal and vertical stretchiness of this thing to being 100%, and yet every time that I wind up, well, not every time, but a lot of the time that I wind up clicking around, you see, I'm trying to scrub through my function editor right now, and it won't even let me. But here, you'll see, look, it teleported right there. I double-clicked down here where all of these keyframes on the function editor are, and it teleported all the way up to the top of the function editor for no reason whatsoever. It just decides, oh, no, you don't want to really create a keyframe there. Create one over here. And so it gets really irritating when these sorts of issues pop up, because you have to not just go through all of the necessary steps to get the animation done, but you have to go through the necessary steps over and over and over again. And once you find where you are in your animation, it'll teleport you someplace else, so you have to find where you are in your animation again and again and again and again and again. And I'm just showing you just a small portion of the time that I wound up using the function editor. And it makes it extremely difficult for you to figure out timing or anything like that, because really, if you can't even keep track of where you are in the animation, because the function editor is just bouncing all over the place, and just to find where you currently are is difficult enough. Finding where you want to be in your timing is just an order of magnitude more difficult. So basically, I think what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to get an audio file and just go something like pew, and then, like, those noises right there will be my timing. Only that I can only have it take up a specific amount of time. So somehow, in Audacity, I need to make sure that I record only specifically within a specific region of time, so that when I wind up putting the audio file into Open Tunes, that my timing matches up perfectly with Flower Sack number 2 when he stomps on the ball. And this is some of the reason why I stopped where I did, because there's just no way to keep track of where I am on the function editor. I'm thinking about next time I tackle this 51 animation challenge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just transition the timeline back to being an X sheet, and hopefully I'll be able to see where I'm at in my animation. So let's go ahead and speed up the animation again. So ultimately, I think that this is really important to fix, and like I said at the beginning of the video, I think the major problem is that we're able to zoom in and zoom out of our frames inside of the horizontal timeline, which is a great feature, but I think this is one of the pitfalls of it. I think this needs to be fixed really bad because of, cutout animation. It relies on the function editor. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe, and if you didn't like it, please like, share, and subscribe anyways. There's a lot of work that goes into making these videos, and if you'd like to take a look at any of my other videos, feel free to click on any of them that are appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.